Mental illness is nothing to be ashamed of, but stigma and bias shame us all. Bill Clinton.
It's a dirty, dirty world. Made me do some things, and other things I did on my own. Sometimes I wish I could erase everyone who witnessed my worst.
Hi everyone, my name is Mark. Welcome to the first of what I hope will be many episodes of the Opening the Window podcast. This is a place where the main goal is to end the stigma associated with mental illness through the sharing of personal stories, for now those of my own and my family's, but maybe those of others later on. Anything you hear in this show only reflects the experiences of one family navigating through the wilderness of mental illness diagnoses. It is not intended to be, nor should it be taken as medical or psychiatric advice, and if you're able, I encourage you to seek out professional help if you feel you need it. Not that you necessarily have any questions, but in case you do, here's a brief FAQ and my answers. So who is your host? Well, I'm a middle-aged husband and father of two boys, one of whom is about to turn 20, and the other who is 16 as I record this. Been married for 22 plus years, living in a rural area of the Mid-Atlantic region of the United States. I'm an audiobook narrator in my day job, and I produce and direct for a community theater group called Acting Out for Good, which raises money for charitable causes and individuals in need. I've podcasted before on other topics and even in character, but this type of program has been on my mind for a while, so I hope I can stick with it and that it will reach its intended audience. Why did I start this podcast? Mostly it's because while members of my immediate family all deal with mental health struggles of various diagnoses and to varying degrees, I do not. I've used the word neurotypical about myself before, but in case that term is seen as diminishing the experiences of those with mental illness, I'll refrain from using it here. Over the years, I have had to learn a lot about the different types of mental illness diagnoses, and along with that, the do's and don'ts of being the support system for a partner or child. Even though every situation is different, and I don't claim to be an expert, I hope at least to allow other parents, spouses, significant others, and others with and without a mental illness diagnosis to know they're not alone, even if they can't be as open as my family has chosen to be. You have your own reasons for being forthcoming or not, and they're all valid. How long will these episodes be? The idea is that they'll be short enough to digest easily on the way to work or at other times where you can devote attention to it. That doesn't mean there won't be episodes here and there that will be longer, and there might be other voices joining at some point, but I know your time is valuable, so I'll try to get in and out in a timely manner. And why the name Opening the Window? Well, the closest metaphor I can think of when describing my own position as someone wanting to understand the battles of my friends and loved ones is that I'm standing on the outside of a window looking in on them. We're close, but there's an invisible barrier. It distorts light and sound so that what you see and hear isn't necessarily reality. If the window could only be opened, maybe we'd at least be able to communicate better, and maybe one of us could enter the space of the other for a true connection. Maybe it's not a perfect metaphor, but for me, it gets as close as anything else. I hope we can all find a way to open the window, whether it's just a crack or all the way. So I'll leave all that explanatory stuff there for now because any more details will become clearer as these episodes start to pile up. For this initial installment, I'm going to go back in time to my own youth for a memory that should illustrate why ending the mental illness stigma is so important, and not just to me. With every show, I'll include a content warning before the main content and in the show description so that you can decide whether or not you want to continue listening. This episode will contain mentions of bipolar disorder, depression, and child abuse. My maternal grandmother passed away near the end of 1999 at age 81. She was the last of my biological grandparents to leave us. The last 15 years or so of her life were mostly spent in nursing homes or in other long-term care situations for physical reasons. But her mental health was never all that stable either. She was never diagnosed, but knowing what I know now, I would hazard a guess that she dealt with either bipolar or post-traumatic stress disorder, maybe both. I learned in later years that her childhood wasn't a happy one. There was abuse, certainly physical and mental, possibly sexual. Many times, my late mother, who was her primary caregiver, gently tried to get her to open up because clearly there were some demons clawing at her psyche. There were dementia-hazed hints here and there, but it became progressively harder to tell what was a real memory and what was her aging brain inventing stories, or what her brain was doing to try to protect itself from revealing anything that was going to damage her. We never got to the bottom of it because, of course, her generation just didn't talk about that. As a result of my grandmother's condition, we often had to rework our lives around one of her months-long downtimes. It was never discussed in terms of mental illness. It was more like, well, Gran can't leave the house right now, so we're going to visit her and Pap. And those visits at those times never went well. We lived in the same town, so those visits were frequent. For sure, we went every Sunday after church. It was like she was a different person, shouting or singing church hymns for no reason, isolating herself in a separate room, and more or less upending the life of my grandpa, who stood by her and never complained that I knew of. I mean, he survived polio, so he didn't complain about anything after that, really. This memory of mine is from 1981. It was my 8th birthday, and my grandma was in one of those downtimes. It was probably the worst during my lifetime before or to come later. But my mom was determined to have as normal a birthday as possible for me, and that included opening presents and having cake and ice cream with the whole family, including her parents, and that meant we had to celebrate at their home. I think we possibly also celebrated my brother's birthday, which was only 8 days after mine, obviously in a different year, at the same time. But I can clearly recall everyone was singing happy birthday in their kitchen, while my grandmother screamed along incomprehensibly from the recliner in the living room next to us. I couldn't see her, but I was petrified. This was anything but a festive occasion. I wanted out of there. I wanted not to be around this scary woman with the wild eyes and the sweat-matted hair, who, when she did look at me, she didn't seem to know who I was anymore. It wasn't like who she normally was. It probably would have been frightening regardless, but I know now that what made it more frightening was that we just didn't talk about it. Not in any meaningful way, anyway. We just continued the party as if there wasn't any wailing at all coming from the next room, or any of those just piercing cries out of nowhere in the silences in conversation. That was the scariest thing of all. Why was this happening? Why weren't we acknowledging it? I know my parents and grandpa had the best of intentions and were probably meaning to shield us kids from any talk that would have been age inappropriate. So I don't fault them, and I don't fault my grandmother. Clearly, she wasn't getting the help she needed, whether that was because of her own choice or because it was just supposed to be hush-hush and she felt she couldn't. But that remains the most memorable birthday of my life, and not for any good reasons. I have no idea what my presents that day were, but I can remember the exact angle of the sunlight coming through the window while I was being sung to, and I remember all the butterflies I felt. I remember wanting to run. I really wish that they didn't have to feel the need to hide it. I wish my grandma could have seen a specialist without worrying about what the neighbors or church members would think. I wish we could have had a discussion about what my grandma's brain was doing to her on a level I could have processed. But this was the 80s. We still were nowhere near being open about all that as a society. We just weren't. We have to change that now. If you come from a generation like mine, where mental differences were either to be feared or ridiculed or swept under the rug, I implore you to set aside that sort of thinking. Those with mental illness are just as deserving of our love and understanding as anyone else. They deserve to be included in our activities, to be employed, to be depended on, and most of all, to be listened to. Those of us who are outside the window can't just walk away, even if it gets frustrating, even if it seems like we're not getting anywhere, even if we can't get that window open. As I've learned, it isn't easy. There will be mistakes aplenty to go around. But with patience, and often when you don't expect it, that window might start to open. And then when we communicate, we can all learn from each other. All right, each episode I'm going to end with something I'm calling a stigma buster. Basically, it's one step you can take to grow more comfortable discussing your own or a loved one's mental health struggles, or if you've already done it, to keep it up. This stigma buster can apply to anyone, but particularly if you're from a generation like mine or maybe generations before, where mental illness was kept quiet and behind closed doors out of shame. Ask someone about their mental health. Ask them if they've ever battled depression that they think might be more than an occasional bout of the blues. And then let them know, if they ever feel that way in the future, that you're going to be a safe space for them. And then follow up, and if needed, follow through. Don't let that be the end of it. My grandmother never got her window to open. She probably felt it wasn't safe to. Let's make the world better for people like her now and moving forward. I appreciate you listening to this first show and hope you'll continue to, and tell your friends about it and share it around. You should be able to subscribe to Opening the Window on all the major platforms if you're not already, and you can also keep up with what we're doing on Instagram at Opening the Window and Facebook at Opening the Window Podcast. I'm not sure yet how regular these episodes will be, but we'll try for twice a month to start and see how that goes, okay? In the meantime, treat yourself right, forgive your mistakes, and continue to write your own story. Together, we'll open the window.
I get postcards from the past, pictures of what happened. I don't stare at them anymore. I forgave myself for good.
Opening the Window's theme music is Mistakes by Adam Rabin from his album The Badger Flies at Dawn, used with permission. You can listen to and purchase his music in all its many styles at mailbox.bandcamp.com, where prog rock meets geek rock.